Welcome, everybody. My name is Josh Rivedal. I am a co-host for Cubicle Lift, an honest conversation on workplace mental health. I'm super excited about today's episode. I'll get to my co-host in just a moment, and we will introduce our three incredible guests who I'm just really excited to have this conversation with. This is a very special Johns Hopkins themed episode. I'm a little bit man out of the water because I did not graduate, but I like Johns Hopkins. I know a lot about the university, and I happen to be connected to four other amazing people here today who are part of the alumni. But we're going to be talking about that and some interesting things happening out of Hopkins. I happen to also, beyond Cubicle Lift, I happen to work founded a company called the I'm Possible Project, and we talk about mental health, suicide prevention in a variety of different ways. You know my stuff. You kind of know what I got going on. So I don't want to bore you with that. You know how to find me. But I'm going to kick it over to my stupendous. It's not the most original, but I got to have a different adjective every time. My stupendous co-host, co-founder, Efrem Epstein. Take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Josh. And you know what? I think we'll take a vote here. I think that we will adopt you as an honorary alum. It's an honor to be with you today. There are a few reasons why today is has some special markers for me. First off, it's the Thursday. We're taping this on Thursday night leading into Memorial Day weekend. And you go back to my big struggle of 2006. That was really when I started to get help coming out of that. But go a little bit further back. One of my first struggles was my sophomore year at Hopkins. And we're actually tying in this themed episode for today, which is Hopkins commencement. We like to do themed episodes, to keep it a little more interesting for ourselves, but we find that it's also very exciting to have guests on who share something in common. It tends to put some interesting spins on the conversation, and it tends to give us reasons to maybe talk about things that from a different angles that we don't talk about, normally. And the interesting thing is that the three alums that we're having on, none of whom were people that I knew at Hopkins. Two of whom were freshmen when I was a senior, and I got to know later on through mutual friends and through mutual interests. And one of them graduated a decade after me. But at the same time, we all have some common bonds, and we all have some common interest around this subject. And we'll be talking about a bunch of more of those issues, including also maybe touching a little bit about that workplace mental health center that's going to be opening up in Hopkins probably next year or two. We talked about that. If you watch Cubicle Lift, we talked a little bit about that on the last episode. And on that, without any further ado, I want to kick it over to Bill Kirst, who's class of 2000.
Thank you, Efrem, and thank you, Josh, and to my fellow alum. It's a great opportunity to be here. My name is Bill Kirst. As Efrem mentioned, I graduated in 2000, Arts and Sciences undergrad. I'm actually now a consultant and have been doing organizational change management consultant for almost 20 years, which is pretty crazy. So I've seen a lot of change in the world. And it is great to be here to chat with you all today. I'm still very active in the Hopkins community. I've served on many boards there, including a lot of work with the alumni organization. I'm also an Army veteran. I was in the Army for 12 years, so I've had a unique perspective when it comes to health, both through my Army story, which I'll share a little bit later, as well as in many workplaces. Being a consultant, you can imagine we get to work and perform and interact in many workplaces because we do the work in our client spaces. So I get to have many different cultures and perspectives in terms of what mental health is like in the workplace. So honored to be here, honored to share some of the story and hear from others. This is an important topic. I'm really, really glad we're talking and sharing today. Thanks.
Thank you, Bill. Jenn, such a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks, Efrem. It's great to be here. Thank you, Josh, too, for having me. I'm Jennifer Heusler-Gehring. I'm an epidemiologist. I graduated from Hopkins in 1993 with Dave. I have a degree from Hopkins Arts and Sciences. I work in Texas for the great state of Texas. I'm the suicide prevention epidemiologist in the Office of Mental Health Coordination at Texas Health and Human Services Commission. And I've been working for about 10 years now. I think we just figured out doing suicide prevention advocacy work. And that's how I know Josh. And Efrem and I have met through mutual alum. And I recently transitioned out of public health into public mental health. And that has been a major experience in workplace dynamics in mental health. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thank you. Such a pleasure. Dave, welcome.
Thanks, Efrem. And Josh, pleasure to meet you. Thank you both for having me and my other fellow alums on here. I'm Dave Morehouse. Like Jenn, I'm graduated from College of Arts and Sciences, class of '93. I'm a lawyer, and so I went straight from college into law school and joined one of the professions with the highest rate of burnout, alcoholism, and possibly suicidal ideation too, although I don't know the statistics on that. I spent a chunk of my career at big law firms, and I spent a chunk of my career in-house. And then about 9 years ago now, a little more than 9 years ago, I started my own practice, primarily in the area of corporate securities and healthcare. So we're now up to, it's a small law firm, and I went to it. I came to it anyway. I'm very conscious of our attempt to sort of practice law at that speed, and also be a little more flexible about the days we're either having transitory or much more sustained mental health issues.
Thank you all so much. Normal viewers will know that usually Josh kicks us off asking questions because he's just amazing at it. He's probably one of the best MCs that you'll find in the world today. But because there are so many ties into the theme, wanted to give myself a chance to ask the first question today. Today was JHU's commencement, or actually, I think it's going on right now. I know all of us can trace back some of our lived experience to our college days. And today is maybe an appropriate day to look back and ask, what, if anything, has changed? My graduation day was in May 1990, and it was just one short year after William Styron, those who know William Styron, best known for probably the author of Sophie's Choice, William Styron's lived experience lecture at JHU's Med Symposium in May 1989. His talk would later be adapted for a Vanity Fair article, and ultimately his bestseller, Darkness Visible. At that time, it was still rather unheard of for a well-known personality to be out and open about their lived experience. Where are we now?
Yeah, I think I would love to jump in on this, because I also want to thank you for telling me about William Styron's book, the article. You and I chatted a while back, and I actually downloaded the audiobook of it, and I remember listening to it. And the thing that jumped out to me about Darkness Visible is I was listening to it during the pandemic, and I thought how this was such a vivid memoir of sorts, and it really captured some of the feelings that I think everybody was going through. And what it reminded me of is, there's this sort of commonplace compassion project that we've all gone through this past year plus. And for some of us, like those of us on the call today, it snaps us back to a time in our past when we've really struggled. And so when you ask the question, like, where are we now? In some ways, I feel like I'm right back where I was as a junior at Hopkins, when my sister had the courage to show up in my dorm room when I was a residential advisor and refused to leave my room until I agreed to go to therapy. And what a courageous thing for her to do as an older sibling, who knew that as a child of an alcoholic and as a child of a workaholic, she saw the patterning that I was doing, which was I was taking care of 60 other souls in a dorm. And the only way that I was surviving was by taking care of others. I wasn't taking care of myself. And so I think what's really interesting about where we are now is I find myself snapped back to those moments where I thought I had it all in control. I thought I was managing it all, when in reality I wasn't. And it reminds me that even though we feel like we're going through all of this on our own, we cannot go through it all on our own. And just recently, I had the second vaccine shot, and I'm reading up on different reactions that people are having. And somebody at work asked me, "Hey, how are you doing? How's it been?" The second shot kind of hit me a little harder than I expected. And the analogy I gave him was, I feel like somebody took my Jenga tower that was made up of neuroplasticity and dexterity and knocked it over. And that Jenga tower is now in pieces on the floor. And I know all those pieces, but I'm going to have to put it back together. And it's going to take me time. It's going to take me space. It's going to take me a lot of forgiveness. And I'm being very honest about that with my coworkers, my family, and my friends. There is a mental fog that I'm in right now, and it's a little scary. So to answer your question a long way, I feel like in some ways we're right back where we started in our mental health journey.
If it's okay, I'd like to jump in. I actually had an interesting way that I came into contact with the William Styron story. I was an inpatient at Hopkins Hospital in the fall of 1992. And I began, I'm not going to say ranting and raving, because I wasn't really ranting and raving, but became very perturbed at the language of mental illness. And my doctor took me aside and gave me a copy of the transcript from Styron's presentation at the symposium and said, "You need to read this. You'll feel much better when you read this." And after that, I actually went to work at the Depression-Related Affective Disorders, which was the nonprofit that existed back then, that was involved in the symposium, and attended a bunch of the symposiums. And, it's a completely different thing. I mean, Mike Wallace came out, Drew Carey came out. I can't even remember who else spoke at these from, it was called The Patient's Perspective. And I think we're in a completely different place now, because we would never be referring to them as patients now, number one. And number two, I mean, when I dropped out of Hopkins for a semester, and it was so hush hush. I was in the hospital for 13 days, and nobody knew. I just disappeared and, fell off the face of the earth for a semester, and then came back. And it was all handled really well by the university. But I think, if that had happened 30 years later now, that it would have been handled really differently. And maybe I wouldn't have been ushered out the back door. And, my classmates would have known how to deal with it. My sorority sisters would have known, better how to deal with it. I would have been much more open about it. And I think that's where I think we're in a good place now. I mean, it's not perfect, but, it was something that I hid in graduate school. And, you're hiding a massive illness. It's something that affects everything about you. And, trying to cover it up was a lot more work than actually dealing with it. And I really came out to most of my friends about, I guess, in 2013, so about 8 years ago. And I was able to do it on my own terms with the help of, you probably had Kara Anna on talking about mental health, but she helped me out, and it made a huge difference. I'm actually in a job now where they see my lived experience as a strength. It's not some Achilles heel that everyone has to, protect. And don't Jennifer's mental health is fragile, so don't be upsetting her or anything. It's like, I have this bastion of knowledge from what I've been through, that they respect, and that they ask for my thoughts and assistance because of it, instead of in spite of it.
Dave, any thoughts?
I was listening to both Bill and Jenn, and I mean, and to Jenn's point, I don't think I knew you dropped out for that semester. And Jenn and I had a bunch of classes together. Like, we ran in the same circles. And that's, and I don't mean to put that on Jenn. It was interesting that the university kept it as quiet as it did. And left it, and then left you to your resources to sort of manage the relationships as you came back, and it's hard. And I appreciate Jenn's optimism, and I think maybe as the father of a child who's been struggling over the last couple of years, and my child is in high school, and they've had some real challenges, and they've been at a school they've been at a high pressure school from kindergarten through now just finished 11th grade. And in certain places, the school's been very flexible, and in certain places the school hasn't. So I appreciate Jenn's optimism and Jenn's lived story. I think both as a lawyer and being aware of the extent to which professionally there is a tendency, this is what drives our substance abuse and our mental health problems and all the other things, there is a tendency among lawyers to try to power through it and not admit that you're human or vulnerable or any of those other things. So understanding it from that perspective and understanding it from the perspective of watching my child struggle, I think I'm a little less optimistic, particularly coming out of the pandemic, as Bill said, than Jenn is. But I recognize that's part of my own walk too. So that's
it's what it's about. It's real. We're all just searching for all this together. First off, I'm sort of to maybe offer something a little bit fun that ties William Styron, that book which he wrote, Darkness Visible, became basically shot Bill Styron up to become the answer to one of my favorite trivia questions. Actually, I'm hoping that someday Josh joins this list. I think there are only 8 authors that topped both New York Times bestseller lists for fiction and nonfiction. You think about what you got to do is you got to be well-known in one genre and write one book off genre. And the other people are like Steinbeck, Hemingway, Jimmy Buffett's on there, Dr. Seuss is on there. Mitch Albom, I think, became the 8th to join that list. And he's on there because, well-known fiction writer, best-selling fiction writer, who then wrote this nonfiction book that became a bestseller as well too. And echoing just some of the narratives that Bill and Jenn shared. My struggle at Hopkins, I don't talk about as much. My 2006 struggle as an adult is what I really think about got me into this world, the advocacy world. But my 1988 struggle was no small thing either. It included my first time ever calling a suicide prevention hotline from Woolman Hall, and dealing with some people close to me, telling them what happened, and them not necessarily reacting the way I wanted them to, because a lot of things we didn't know in 1988. And, me saying, do I need to take a semester off from college? And I think I made the right move for me at the time to not do that, because I think that it allowed me to remain among my support group, which is great. At the same time, I didn't tell a lot of people what was going on. I was on medication, but my line there was like, I can't drink because I'm on medication. I didn't tell them what medication I was on. Some people knew that I'd had some issues. I'm not sure they knew to what extent. And yeah, it's, as Jenn said also, in terms of it mainstreaming in the years since, what I still have happened and what I still actually been happening last day or two is people who have known I've been involved in this cause for a while sending me a note, everyone, oh my gosh, this celebrity, this singer is now talking about their mental health struggles. Lady Gaga, Demi Lovato, this football player. And they make it sound like it's big news, which it is. But them thinking that, it's big news at the same time, me saying, yes, this has been going on for a while. This always was. It's just now you're seeing people more and more welcome to go to the media and the media writing about it.
For another perspective, even maybe just summarize a little bit. I'm seeing 4 other people on this Zoomcast that we do here today. And you asked, where are we now? Well, I just heard 3 stories of lived experience and an adjacent story of lived experience. So I guess that counts. So 4 stories of lived experience of people who are in really solid careers, people who present outwardly quite solid. And I think 30 years ago, because that's sort of the date you gave, 31 years ago, I don't think any of us would have dared to have this conversation in public, right? So like we're doing that. That's awesome. And I'm to where I am now in this moment, I'm filled with emotion, gratitude, joy, slight uneasiness, because there's the vulnerability to that, like yours and mine. I'll open up sooner or later on this Zoomcast. We'll get there, but in the moment I'm feeling that, and I think we wouldn't have been there 30 some odd years ago. Where are we now? Well, I live with 2 mental illnesses. I live with depression, generalized anxiety disorder, and clinical depression. And I came out, if you can call it that, which is what we're doing, in 2011, right? 2011, 2012. Like I was experiencing extreme suicidality in the beginning of 2011 at age almost 27. And I happened to be back in college at the time in New York City. I was a part-time student, and I didn't necessarily it was a commuter school, so I wasn't super connected to people that I was going to school with. So it's a different experience than the residential piece, right? Valid, but different, right? And so I didn't have those connections that some of y'all may have had, right? And yet what I found was I sort of reached out to family and friends, and that felt really risky. Because I didn't know anyone talking about this in 2011. And then I sort of transitioned into counseling therapy through the university towards the end of the semester, and then through the summer and through the next year. And I've been in this field just about ever since. And so where are we, right? One thing that I think needs to change, because where are we, right? There's a lot of positives, right? We have a president who's been open about, we have pop stars and basketball players, and that's fantastic. And we have us, right? That's necessary too. We're spokes in the wheel too, no less valid, right? We need to stop as a society talking about mental health and mental illness. They're not the same, by the way. But we need to stop talking about mental illness and mental health as if they're moral failings and personal failings. It's a societal thing. It's the box that we live in. So it's like, you got yourself into this mess, now you get yourself out. That's not how it works, right? We wouldn't do that to some, because they're legitimate health conditions, they're legitimate health challenges. And so it's not someone's moral failing. They experience trauma as a young person. Their decisions, can be affected by that. They've experienced trauma at this age. They're experiencing food insecurity, homelessness, fill in the blank, right? So of course, your mental health or mental illnesses will be exacerbated. Of course, it's going to be more difficult. So in a sense, if we're doing this Zoomcast in 10 years, I don't want to talk about people coming out. I'm getting a little heated. I don't want to hear people talk coming out. I want to this being the conversation you have on the elevator, and You know, the stranger, they go, oh yeah, me too. Oh yeah, oh, let me tell you about my thing. You know, like it's commonplace, right? So that's, I think, where we're at now. It's a mixed bag, and I'm very optimistic. I'll share Jen's optimism. Sorry, Dave. No, but I'm teasing. But yeah, so let's and you know, we don't have to be wrapped on that question. Feel free to chime in. This is a conversation, but I'm gonna
I just want to, if I can just react to that too. I hear you. I really believe that this is something that the more open we are able to be, the better it's going to be a society, the more open we're able to be a society. But I do want to also say that it's people's own decisions how much they want to disclose about things. And there are people that may not be ready or may have reasons beyond. I can tell you that I was ready to talk about this more in 2007. I'm not sure I would have, had I went through 2006 in 1995. I'm not sure I would have been prepared to talk about it in 1996. There are all types of reasons why people are on different timelines. And there are some people that just are very private people. And I respect that as well too.
Yeah, I think, you know, Josh, I think it's really important that when you talk about this aspect of it's not a moral failure, you know, I think there are systems and there are parts of our understanding of society that are catching up to that. You know, I know we exchanged some notes, even as something as simple and profound as this documentary that a lot of people are talking about this week, The Me You Can't See, that's on Apple TV with Oprah, Prince Harry, Lady Gaga, as you mentioned, Efrem. Like, this is good because it's finding its way into the living rooms of a lot of people to discuss. You know, I watched that this past weekend almost in one sitting, and it's, you know, it's six very long episodes, and each kind of builds like a chapter. And I realized how profound that was, because when I was in the military, I mean, let's just be clear, right? If I was having this conversation when I was in the military, at the time I was in the military, I would have lost my clearance. My top secret clearance would have been taken away from me, which would have meant I couldn't do my job, which would have meant I would have breached my contract, which would have meant that, you know, I've got all sorts of penalties, and, you know, within UCMJ. And I think back to those moments of when I was getting therapy during ROTC, and when I, you know, shared with the therapist that I was in the military. I was very fortunate. The person who was sitting across from me was a former Special Forces soldier. So what he said to me was, I'm going to code this in a way on insurance so that if anybody ever looks this up, it shows up as career counseling, not as counseling. And I didn't know at the time all the different codes you can use and how it shows up in insurance and all that. But this is someone that looked out for me. This is also someone that knew the stigma, the system we were up against. And I think it's important that you name it, Josh, this aspect of it is not a moral failure. And I do hope we get to a place where we are having conversations that start off with, what happened to you? Like, what is it that makes you who you are? I think that much of my own mental, you know, my own mental health journey is much of my superpower. You know, it's part of why I shared that aspect of the Jenga tower. It also takes a lot of energy to hold up that Jenga tower. And maybe the fact that it fell over and this reset is actually a good thing for me. I don't know that yet. I just know I'm looking down at all the pieces and going, oh man, I worked on that tower for so long. I'm excited about what that means, to your point, that we can talk about that more, but I'm also very conscious, and I remember it, like I could feel it, that sense in under my rib cage of, can I say what I'm going to say without risk of losing my job, losing my clearance, losing my friends, so forth and so on. I think, Dave, you talked about that similarly in the legal industry. It's very, very similar.
By the way, Bill, I just want to also add, I have not seen the Oprah Prince Harry special yet, but I'm hearing wonderful things about it. I mean, from you and from other people as well too. I want to bring that up because I know definitely myself, Josh, and Jenn have talked and have been part of conversations about, in recent years, there have been shows or movies that have not portrayed mental health, that made them in pop culture, that have not portrayed mental health responsibly and have done damage. So I think it's important to give shout outs when a show does it responsibly. Once again, I haven't seen it yet, but people I trust are giving rave reviews. And one thing that I know they did is that they consulted they asked people who were in the know and responsible people to consult, one of whom is somebody who, a friend of yours, Dr. Vic Schwartz, who I think had a role in Josh and I and how we initially met. I think that he had a role in inviting both Josh and myself to the event where Josh and I met back in 2011.
Yeah, at Hillel. No, not at Hillel.
At Active Minds at Yeshiva University.
Yeshiva University, yes, 2011. It was one of my first speaking events, and yeah, you were one of my panelists, one of our panelists, and yeah. I just want to kick back one thing that you mentioned, because you made a great distinction, before Bill spoke, about people being in different places and disclosing and sharing. I suppose I should have qualified that with, because there's a lot of ways to share, right? Like, aren't there? And there's like, you can do it in a safe place. You can start off by talking to your cactus. You could say, I mean that. Like, I know that sounds silly, but I mean that. Like, you can start off in safe places.
That's right. One of the hardest things in my own journey was just admitting to myself, saying it out loud, saying it to my wife that I needed help. In fact, it was when I broke down in front of my child's therapist, who looked at me and said, we have some other good therapists in this practice. Yeah, maybe. You're like bawling on her couch.
Yeah, so I think, I just want to reiterate, thank you, Dave. Just that there's so many ways to share. And when I was going off on that initial diatribe, I wasn't suggesting that you need to be public. Like, Josh gets on stage and speaks to thousands of people, and F and Dave, and you do it in the way that feels authentic and right to you. And I always encourage people to start out small, start up in a safe place, ask for what you need to start out, like such as, hey, I've got something to tell you. I don't want advice right now, or I just need you to hold me while I tell you this, or whatever. And that's kind of a nice thing too, because you start to practice asking and being assertive about what you need. And you'll also find out if that person is someone who you can, is someone, to the well you can go back to. And of course we want to spread the love out and all that, but just, and that's really, and to be perfectly honest, I had to start out small myself. I wasn't out, busting down doors and telling everybody, hey, I got a problem, I got issues. I was like mom and friend, and then therapist, and then somehow I got on stage. Yeah. So I do think it's great to transition to another question. How do you think your college years shaped you for confronting mental health, or being open? I should say, maybe shaped you for being open, and that's either encouraging someone else or being open about yourself, but confronting mental health in the workplace. How do you think it shaped you? And we heard some of that. Jenn, please dive in.
Well, for me, it was, admitting it to someone else that I was in really bad trouble. And I remember sitting on the front steps of, I can't even remember the name of the hall. It was one in front of the NEB. But we were supposed to be going into a class in there, and instead sat on the front steps, bawling my eyes out for a couple hours, until she finally took me to counseling and psychiatric services on campus and said, you need to, and she, I really feel like she saved my life, that was a real turning point. And I've been that person for other people now. And I think, to your point about, everybody comes out in their own way, and you come out where it's safe. I don't care if you just tell your cat and one other person, but you shouldn't have to hold it by yourself. I think that's the bottom line. You shouldn't have to just hold it all inside. I tried to kill myself in 1983, and my parents never knew, and they didn't find out until I blogged about it. 30 years later. And that was the time that I needed. And, they knew that I had been in crisis, but they didn't know that I had ever acted on it. And I think it felt safe to me at that point to admit it. And it shouldn't be something that you have to admit either. I mean, I don't like that word because it makes it sound like it's something horrible that you have to confess to or something, and it's not. But I just completely lost where I was going with this. But I guess the thing that I just wanted to really say is that, learning to reach out to other people and to trust other people with that kind of information is something that I tie back to Hopkins. Although there were a lot of people that I didn't trust with the information. Let's be clear about that. But I did trust, at least one person with it.
Thank you, Jenn.
I just want to say this. I'm sorry. Go, Bill.
Oh, I was just going to say, I love the part about, how did my college years or our college years kind of shape this for us now, Josh? I think for me, it's a very succinct memory, which is when I went to Johns Hopkins as a freshman, prior to that, I had never had to worry about just me, myself, and I. I'm one of 6 children. My mom's one of 10 children. I would later on meet my husband, who's one of 10 children. I've just always had large families and tribe around me. And when I went to Hopkins, everybody's like, you just have to worry about me, myself, and I. And I was terrible at it, really horrible at it. And I struggled for 2 years until I became a residential advisor. And when I became a residential advisor, all of a sudden I was back in my lane of taking care of other people. And that brought me back to life a little bit, but it also highlighted the fact that I was not taking care of myself. I was willing to spend time in moments of crisis with young people, freshmen, and guide them in discussions like we're talking about now. And part of me doesn't even remember where that came from, right? We weren't necessarily schooled and all that. We were kind of told some things to listen for, and then when it escalated, take it to some of the resources. But as we know, it doesn't work that way. When somebody's in a moment like that, it's not like, oh, you said this word, stop, now walk with me across campus. It just doesn't work that way. You stay with people. You reassure them. You hold them if you can. And I found myself in those moments doing that. And it was such a gift to be able to do it. And I was able to pull on my own sort of family upbringing and the fact that you look out for others. And I remember being in this very weird juxtaposition where I was looking down at a student, helping a student in a moment of crisis. And I kind of had this weird out-of-body experience where I was like, you haven't even afforded this for yourself. Like, who are you to be giving, listening, holding another human being when you're breaking down inside? And it reminds me a lot that those that look, right, residential advisors, like nobody forgets their name. You always remember where you were when you met them and things like. Those are people that sometimes, like celebrities and others, they appear all completely put together. And sometimes we don't afford the fact that inside they too are holding something. They've gone through something. And so in that moment, I realized I'm going to carry that with me for the rest of my life, to remember that feeling of you need to afford yourself this too, if you're going to carry the graces and livelihood and hopes and dreams of other people. And I was very fortunate that my sister, as I shared before, came and said, I'm not leaving until you agree to go to the counseling center. Other names you'll never forget, the names of your therapists. I will never forget the names of these people. They are integral in my life. And that's what I think that college years really helped me get to a place where I can do what I do now, help myself and help the others around me. So I remember that like it was yesterday. I appreciate the question.
It's I think this is our 10th episode, and each episode we have people we love on, people we respect on, and every episode it's conversations like this that are basically invite a certain degree of vulnerability. But one of the reasons why we mentioned at the beginning, we like changing the dynamic and like even doing themes where we see would be interesting to have this specific grouping of people on is because it does sort of shake up ourselves too. And I will say that I'm feeling in this conversation a different sense of vulnerability, at least for myself. I'm feeling that I'm dropping the mask. I'm whatever I go on, I take my role as a quote unquote co-host all that seriously here, but I'm feeling that I'm just now totally mask is totally down now in this conversation. Yeah. One of the things I think that makes college, and I think we talked about this a little bit when we had Alice Malman on, that makes it an especially challenging, in addition to the workload and the pressures there, is that there's an idea that you enter college with often with such high expectations. And so it's definitely, it went back when I entered college in the mid 80s, maybe a little less so now. This is supposed to be the best years of your life. And then when you graduate, life is no longer fun, which then puts a lot of pressure on those 4 years or 3 years or 5 years, whatever it is. And I think that that was part of what challenged me my sophomore year, is that, you know, it's not that life, any individual part of my life was so bad, but just, is it really hitting this pedestal that's supposed to be on? And it was a challenge. And I think that one of the things that I've learned from that, how to deal with that, because, and then ultimately things did get better emotionally for me, is knowing that, you know what, you're going to have other challenges like that. You're going to have disappointments. You're going to have days where, or experiences or years where I thought this was going to be really amazing. I thought this job was going to be really amazing. I thought this relationship was going to be really amazing. I thought that this was the right place I wanted to be in, and maybe it's not. And that can open things up. And that, without going too much in there because it's a longer story, I think that a bunch of those things coming together is what set me up for my fall in 2006. And I think that there were things that I was able to learn from having gone through 1988 that I took through 2006. I thought 1988 was a blip, and that was something I went through, and I'll never go through that again. And then I got a little wiser after I went through that experience in 2006.
Dave, want to give you a chance to chime in as well, if you so choose.
And by the way, no one should feel pressure to talk. There's no reason why.
Yeah, I think to some degree I've said I was pretty naive and a little and I was very naive. I was naive going in. I was probably naive along most of the time I was there. And I was probably naive enough looking back at it. There were some things in, as I said, senior year that I probably, had I been less naive, would have had the opportunity to reach out and seek a little more help that I didn't. And looking back at it, I can see how there are some threads from not getting help then that did lead into my career a little bit. But some of that really is, and then it's, you know, I keep coming back to this, is reinforced by, I think it's, I mean, and then after I graduated from law school, every continuing education class I ever went to talked about, because you always get the ethics section, and the ethics often are about the extent to which lawyers have a substance abuse problem, and a lot of the in the old classic stories, a lot of the ethics violations relate to substance abuse problems, and when you really take another step back and realize what's really going on, all of that ties into undiagnosed, untreated, unadmitted mental health concerns that we're not equipped. we're not equipped. There's a bunch of people like me coming out naive, and I'm not putting this on Hopkins. That's on me.
It's not on you. It's on society.
Well, no, I get that. That's where I came to it from. and that's the walk I walked, and that's the history. So, but I can, looking back at it, I think there are some threads from not seeking help at the time, maybe not being comfortable with people, not having the kinds of relationships Jenn was talking about, who of the people who you could be vulnerable enough with under the circumstances and say, okay, you really need to go. I would I love you and you should go get some help. And I can see those threads. I can see those threads coming through to my own personal breakdown later.
I wish it were possible to just reach into Zoom right now and give everybody here a big hug. I mean, we aim for real conversations on this, and we're getting it tonight. This is a real conversation. As I said, my mask is off. I'm feeling vulnerable in a good way. And going back to what Josh said, I think that really shows that we're having this conversation, just really how far we have come.
I just want to kind of chime in, and then I think what I want to do is then sort of summarize and flip a little bit the third question that you drafted, F, and kind of make it. I'll explain in a minute, but I'll summarize just a little bit of like and just express my appreciation for everyone just answering that question in a way that made sense to their journey, and like because we all have a different journey, right? And so like there's like Dave's is like long tail, there's aha moment a little bit later, and then Bill and Jenn kind of had some more like in the trenches lived experience while they were going through their undergrad journey. And then I come to it as a 26, almost 27-year-old non-traditional age college student on a commuter campus. And I think how it shaped me is that I'm not a finished product, I came out and I'm baked and now I'm done. Like, it really made me realize that like, there's always work to do, and it's exciting and it's interesting. And in the beginning, it was very much like, it was very career focused and like, oh, I leveled up here. And I also got like a little more mentally well. And I'm a little more comfortable asking for help. And even though I was speaking publicly about this and earning a living and doing good work, there was still like, oh, I'm kind of good at the moment. And then I realized life hit me in the face, and it's like, okay, you've got more work to do, Josh. Like, and so figuring that out led me to then finding, okay, this is how we find balance here and here. And the balance piece is sort of an ongoing process, which to me is also kind of interesting, and like learning where the shifts come, and that plays into mental health, that plays into physical health. And so learning that, and then also this idea that I heard from a mentor / teacher at this time, because I was taking some coaching, human capital management classes as well. And she said something along the lines of, everything is happening for me and not to me. And that's like a choice we get to make. And I was like, oh my God. And I had to have her repeat it again. And that's just something that I express in a lot of the speaking events. And I try to remind myself of that on an ongoing basis. And that just plays into, because I think a lot of things come back to mental health. I really do. The health of the brain and the health of our perspective and outlook, and how we're showing up on our daily. But for me, one of those things again is just everything is happening for me and not to me. And so now I get a choice to make. And that's something that all of us have the opportunity to take, and you don't have to. It's none of my business, but just that idea that everything's happening for me and not to me, then I can make a choice. Like, where's the lesson here? What am I supposed to learn? Yes, I can grieve and mourn over here and hold this. And then when it's time to really lean into the lesson or the thing or that or the thing, the takeaway, it's going to be there, So, but I might need to hold that difficulty or the challenge for a little while. So. And that's my journey, right? That's sort of my takeaway from my college years, and I'm grateful, right? Now, I want to flip this third because I want to close us down a little bit. So this is going to kind of be not Jerry's final thoughts, because we're not doing Springer, but we're but we're but
Mayor of Cincinnati, by the way.
yeah, you're right. But what I want to do is sort of have everyone give their final thought around this idea, this question. But it's I'm going to make it more of a statement because healing can come from drawing on those with whom we share commonalities. I mean, it's proven, right? Common interest, ethnicity, background. I mean, one of the first things when people, and this is, I don't have the science in front of me, but I recently studied it in a class because I'm back in school again. But the fact that whether it's algebra or mental health, when they're first learning how to reach out for help, or they're learning how, whatever the case may be, they're going to look for somebody who looks and sounds like them. The easiest way to understand that is why a 12-year-old goes to 12-year-old for like any sort of support, when clearly, like the rest of us know, like you probably need to go to a doctor or somebody, right? So assuming that, and that is true, how does that inform? How do you see, each of you, how do you see, like in a couple sentences, and maybe even something hopeful, right? But how do you see commonalities informing how we approach mental health in the workplace? It's a big question. I can start if you want.
I'll start a go there. I think that for better or for worse, we tend to, maybe words and trust, but we tend to feel more comfortable or more ready to open up for people that we share some in common denominators with. And go back to that World Suicide Prevention Day in 2009, which had to deal with where I was listening to people talk about, you can be, the reason why we have mental health organizations for people of color is because they feel more comfortable talking to people that have similar backgrounds, similar with the elderly, similar for LGBTQ. And that's what inspired me to start Elijah's Journey, to have a mental health org that basically did some framing from the Jewish standpoint. And I think it's similar that, we can open up to people, or we're ready to start opening up to people that we share common denominators with. It may be silly, but even such things as rooting for the same sports team, or coming from the same religion, sharing a religious background, or that we used to work from the same workplace. We may need to identify that in a workmate. And similarly with the three people that are here in this Zoom room with me, I didn't know any of them in college, but even just saying that they're going to know what the Gilman Clock Tower looks like, and they maybe have rooted for the Hopkins Blue Jays at Homewood Field before. Does that, in a weird way, that says, might feel a little more comfortable opening up to them than I would somebody that I don't share that with. So it may not be, in the end, the people we feel close to are often built on a lot more than that, but often that can be an icebreaker. And so I think it's important. And when the name of the game is getting people into a comfort zone where they do feel comfortable sharing, especially in a workplace where I think it's important to basically recognize that as well too. I think that is something that we should be encouraging people to look for.
Yeah, I feel like this aspect of kind of the lived experience and celebrating that in every human being that you come across, I just feel like it's this new and ancient story on both sides of it. And I think for me, Josh, I think the thing I really liked you said before is you're learning. I'm always learning. When I think about the relationship with my brain, with my body, with my gut, I'm always learning. I only discovered meditation about 6 years ago because of, a breakdown in the middle of the night, and having a spouse that was watching that happen and saying, I can't watch you come undone. Like, we've got to figure something out. You're composing emails aloud in your sleep. Like, this is not okay. And because of that, he said, get up, research. Like, you're a brilliant mind. You went to Hopkins, research some stuff. There's got to be a better way. And I typed in all the symptoms I was experiencing. And the first thing that popped up, was probably an ad, but it was for Headspace, which is a meditation app. It's completely changed my trajectory, right? And I think about this sort of, everybody's on this pathway. And while each pathway looks a little bit different, it shares a lot of commonalities, right? We're on a pathway for happiness, pathway for fulfillment, pathway for growth, pathway for grief, gratitude, longevity, all of these things. We all have that somewhere in us. So for me, the thing I take away is every time I get to interact with someone, be it in a Zoom room or in person, and I totally agree with you, F, I would give everybody a hug here, and I miss hugs, and we're getting closer to that again, which I'm very excited about. But those pathways can't be forged alone. We share all of those things in common, and every time I have the opportunity to sort of do a little dance with another human being, be it work, be it on the street, in a cafe, what have you, I just remember, like you talk about, Josh, we've all got those pathways inside of us. We're all searching for those same things. And I try and meet people where they're at, and then see what rolls out, and hope I can leave them in a better place than I found them, and vice versa. And then I just go home and I try and learn more, which has brought me to things like this. So thanks for the opportunity.
Appreciate you. Jenn, showdown, game of chicken. Who's doing it? Or not? It's all good.
I think, everything that Josh and F and Bill have said is true, and it looks maybe what I'm doing is I'm falling into the role of the one person who has the cautionary note. I am, again, because I'm so conscious of having walked this walk in the past. And I'm conscious of trying to not do that now that I have people working for me, but having been at big institutions, being vulnerable in the workplace is hard. It's scary, right? It's a double vulnerability, because in addition to being vulnerable in the way we're all telling this story, which opens you to the possibility of pain, ridicule, whatever, because people don't understand, choose not to understand the walk you're on. To do it in the workplace, that's your job, right? That's the thing that pays the mortgage and, puts food on the table. And that's scary. So I don't want to, and I don't mean to be the like wet blanket. I'm just, and this is maybe more thinking about what a Center for Workplace Mental Health can do and be, which is really encouraging employment work to be better, right? To not treat people like interchangeable parts, for even employers to see their employees in the way Bill's talking about meeting everybody where they are. And so that's I know for myself, that's what I feared in workplaces. And so again, this is one of the great things about being my own boss, is I don't have to fear that anymore. It's just me. But I am conscious of that on the other side, being on the other side of the table for the first time. So, but yeah, that's my hope, is that my hope is that coming out of the pandemic, we're stepping into a place where we're not going to treat each other as just interchangeable parts.
Thank you so much, Dave. I just want to point out something, because we hopefully will have people watching this from all over the country, all over the world. We're all in different places geographically, and so my perspective, when I say I'm optimistic, is from conversations I'm having in New York City. And once again, we have all types of perspectives in New York City. I also do speak to people around the country too. But I should also I think you're perhaps aware, not every part of the country, not every part of the world is in the same place in these conversations. And I think that's important too. And the perspective that I have, or the perspective that somebody might have in New York or Philadelphia, may not match the perspectives of places in other parts of the country or other parts of the world.
Jenn.
I guess I need to jump in. What's just really resonating with me about this idea of meeting people where they're at is that we all need each other on a level that we don't even understand completely. I mean, as far as, what's made the biggest difference in my mental health is having my people, my connections. And that is just really crucial. And I think I work in a mental health agency, and we're trauma informed, whatever you want to take that to mean. But they don't treat us as interchangeable parts, which is amazing, because I've been in the big organizations where, epidemiologists are a dime a dozen, and if you don't do it, we can find someone else who will, kind of deal. And it has been eye-opening to realize how much people are abused, in other workplaces. But to your point about New York and Philadelphia and other places on the East Coast, I mean, I'm in Texas, for God's sakes. I mean, it's not the most forward-looking place in the world. You just have to look at what our legislature has been passing to realize that. But I think you can find your people wherever you are, and along with meeting people where they're at, you have to be met where you're at as well. And I guess I have to be the optimist on this one and say that I think maybe it's just my own life where things are getting better, but I think things are getting better,
Super. Thank you, Jenn.
By the way, I lived in Texas when I was very young, lived in Galveston, age 1.5 to 4. It's actually where my earliest memories are from.
I think I'll chime in, close down, and just say there's a word that comes to mind as we talk about that healing can come from drawing on those who share commonalities. The word grace, right? Grace. You see somebody struggling, or you see somebody whose behavior you don't agree with, right? And you attribute that behavior to them being bad or selfish or rude, maybe, but that could also be them having mental health challenges or unhealthy coping mechanisms and skills, right? And then grace for self, right? So grace for them and being like, hey, maybe their life kind of sucks. Like, what can I do or what can we do as an organization to sort of just even improve or whatever, like, or just when if it sucks over there, maybe while they're here, we can do something different. They still have to do the work, of course. Grace for self, right? I'm struggling, or I'm approaching a struggle, or I'm having a hard time. Others are struggling too. And so your vulnerability is going to beget vulnerability from someone else and vice versa. There's ways to do that. Sometimes it's just in the way that we show up. It doesn't have to be a disclosure, right? It can be how we live, how we walk our talk, things like that. So I think the word grace, right? Because I think, to Dave's point, I think, there are cases where it's very difficult. Even Bill, like, I'm going to lose my clearance or things like that, right? So, and that stuff still exists, right? So in that sense, there are ways to show up like your therapist. I'm going to code this differently, or Dave, I'm going to be a different kind of a boss. So there's ways that we show up for ourselves and others. I think if we can come back to that word grace for self and grace for others. I want to thank our guests for being them. I think that's enough of a thank you, but for joining us on this conversation. I got a lot out of it. These conversations are always great for my professional life and my lived experience and my journey and my healing and my knowledge base. So I'm incredibly grateful for that. And of course, we're saying my stupendous co-host, Efrem Epstein. So I appreciate you, man. This is episode 10. Thank you. If you watched, appreciate you. Share it, pass it along. I'm Josh Rivedahl for Efrem Epstein and our three illustrious guests. Thank you for tuning in to Cubicle Lift, an honest conversation on workplace mental health. See you next time. Thank you.